Hi, my name is Fenelle Belle. I'm a teacher here at the Piedmont Community College Art Department, and I'm going to show you today how to get your artwork matted, which will, if you learn how to do this, it will save you a lot of money. So eventually what we're going to produce is something like this, a picture with a beautiful mat inside a frame. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to take whatever your artwork is. We have this fabulous print here today, and we're going to take this and we need to measure it very carefully. You're not going to assume that just because you thought it was 8 by 10 that it is 8 by 10. You really need to make sure that you actually measure this pretty carefully. Yes, okay, 7 inches. And I'm going to write these measurements down on a scrap piece of paper, and I'll write them in 7 inches. And the other way, it is 5 inches, okay? And then the other thing I need to know is the size of the mat board, the size that is going into the frame. So I've already decided this is going into an 8 by 10 frame. So the first thing I did was I cut a piece of mat board to 8 by 10, and I can show you that separately. But that's a pretty simple process. So I have two numbers. I have 10 inches and I have 8 inches. And what I'm going to do, and this is the hard part, because this is the part where you have to do math, but don't be scared, you don't have to do too much math. What you're going to do is you're going to, I like to draw this out on a piece of paper. I take the size of the mat board, and what I'm trying to do is cut a little window inside. The mat board is 8 inches this way, 10 inches that way. The art image is 5 inches and 7. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract those numbers from each other. So 10 minus 7 is going to give me 3. 8 minus 5 is also going to give me 3. That is way convenient. So what I have is I have 10, which is one direction of the mat board, minus 7, which is the same direction of the artwork. And then I have 8, which is the other direction of the mat board, minus 5, which is the other direction of the artwork. And I subtract that, and in both cases I ended up with 3. That hardly ever happens, just enjoy it when it does. And that's going to tell me how much mat board I have to split between the two sides. So I'm going to divide those by 2 and come up with 1.5 for each of those. Okay, so those are my dimensions for my border around, and that's what I'm going to cut my mat board to. This is the mat board, and most mat board has one side which has paper on it and one in the back side which doesn't. So you want to do all you're doing on the back side, the non-pretty side. There's one little trick here before I measured, and I'm going to show you this way. I made a Xerox of our image just so you could see. If I make the window exactly the size of the image, what will happen is the mat will come and it will actually be a little too big. And we'll see these edges of this image. And that's what happens with this black line, is it fits right there, but it doesn't have any overlap. And what we really want is we want to have a little overlap so that we have these edges of the image tucked inside. So I'm going to actually add 1/8 inch to each of these, okay? I know it's scary. It's an 1/8 inch fraction. Don't worry too much, because on the ruler, what you can do, you don't have to do all this math in your head, is you can just come in here and measure 1.5 inches, and then add 1/8, which is what I did to get this line here. You want to make in every direction 1.5 plus 1/8. You want to make those lines, you want to make 2 marks so that you have a straight parallel line. So all of these lines right here I've pre-measured, and they are where I want my border to be. Before I start cutting anything, I double check, because that's just the way it goes. And what I'm going to double check is I'm going to hold up my image, and I'm going to make sure that my image is a little bigger than where the line is. And I do it in both directions. I want to check here, is there a little overlap, yep. And here, is there a little overlap and a little overlap. If I'm using the image like this, I just, if it's thin, if it's enough I can see through, I check it that way, or I just kind of eyeball it and make sure. Okay? Great, so now we're going to go cut. So here we are at the mat cutter, and the mat cutter is, I call it a machine, it's kind of a tool. And it lifts up like this. It has a guide here that you can use and set so that you're cutting your borders all at the same dimension. And then it has a knife which sits on top of it. And what happens is you take your board, you put it in here so that this line lines up with that edge. It'll keep it nice square. And then this knife has 2 little grooves here. They're going to go and ride along this channel here. it also has a tiny little line here that's really faint. And this line is really important because that's going to show you where you start and where you stop. This line you're going to end up lining up with your first line and your second line, and that's going to tell you when you start and stop. This knife also pivots. It's going to pivot. I put my thumb here and I push down like that, and it will punch through the mat board. And it's important to give it a good punch, otherwise you won't go through the whole board. So I'm going to come up here. I'm going to start. I've got it lined up. My line and my line are lined up. I'm going to hold this down a little bit so it doesn't move, and then I'm going to punch through and pull it down all the way until my line now lines up with my bottom line. Lift this out, take it off, and then turn this. So all of my margins are the same for this particular mat, so I don't have to worry about changing. If I have different margins, I will reset that dimension every time. One more time, line my things on the groove, line up to line, hold down, punch through, come down, and lift it up, lift it off. And since I already did 2 of the lines, this little bit comes out and we have a window. So here we have our artwork, and we've already cut our frame, and we're getting ready to put it in the mat and then in the frame. What I've done is I've taken a piece of tape and I've put it under here and over here with the sticky side up, okay? And that just allows me to take my mat and hover it over here until I find the sweet spot. I don't want any white edges to show, so I'm just gonna basically center it. I'm gonna put it down, press it onto that tape, lift this up, and then I'm just gonna take and put another piece or 2. I'm not gonna put tape all the way around it and close it in completely. I'm just gonna put enough to tack it there. And that's ready to go now. Underneath here I have a frame, and this gets turned around, put in that frame, fits fabulously, and then the frame gets assembled, little clips get put down, and we have a finished beautiful piece of art.